What's up? Why do I hear a second song? Anyway, what's up, music lovers? This is Alan. We are Modern Musicology Podcast. How's everybody doing?
Hi, people. We're doing good.
Awesome. So let me introduce the gang. Up at the top right, we have Rob Levy, journalist and DJ.
Hey, greetings and salutations.
All right. On the bottom left, we have a bass player and a guy from London, Anthony Williams.
Sup?
And on the bottom right, we have singer, songwriter, solo artist, former drummer of the Aquanettas, Stephanie Seymour.
Hello, people. Hi, everybody.
All right. So tonight we are talking about what makes a great vocalist. We're talking about singers from rock and roll, from soul, from metal, from anything that comes across our path. We have got a lot of stuff that we're going to be talking about. The nice thing about popular music is that it covers so many different genres, so many different styles, and there's just an endless array of people that we can discuss tonight. So my first question is, what to you makes a great vocalist? What is it? What are the qualities that you look for or listen for when you're listening for what you consider great performances?
I always look for, I feel like I'm going to be kind of two minds tonight. One part of me feels like a great vocalist is technically good, but then I also feel like a great vocalist, can just not be technically good, but have an amazing kind of style, an amazing presence, somebody that captures you when you're, a live performance that might be, really gripping. So I feel like I have different criteria, and it doesn't always fit every box. What about you guys?
Yeah, I feel that, Stephanie. My initial thought was someone has to have a great set of pipes, right? They have to be able to have a huge range. But as I thought about it more and more, I realized that's not necessarily the case.
Right.
I think someone can have a very limited range, but still be very good at what they do within that.
Exactly.
So there's an element of kind of knowing where their strengths are and playing to those strengths. And I know it's potentially controversial, but I would also say a certain level of charisma.
Oh, without a doubt. I used to be in a band back in Florida where we changed singers. We had a guy who was not the best singer. He did a good job. He could carry a tune, but he didn't have the best voice. But he was phenomenal on stage.
Mm-hmm.
And you could connect with him. He sold whatever you were selling. Yeah. He was phenomenal. He left. Then another guy came in, and he was a good singer. I mean, just a beautiful voice and really good, but stiff as a tree on stage.
Yep.
And so you do have exactly that. You have the people with charisma, the people with a good voice, and sometimes in one package you have both things, and that's when it's magic.
Yeah.
I also looked at what their legacy is to connecting them to now, and also sort of in some cases their connections to the past as well. I think that there's certain people that are going to be influences almost on every single person we mentioned today, which is kind of interesting. But I look at their legacy, I look at their body of work, the duration of the work. In some cases, it's been very short and really brilliant. But I also look at, have they crossed over into other genres and things like that too.
Mm-hmm.
So just really quickly, I just want to say that some random guy named Bob Perry says, "Great to see you on screen."
That might be my husband.
Who's that guy?
Right. Never heard of that guy. So I should say that for the people watching, if you have questions or comments about anything as we go along, just post them wherever you're watching, and we will see them and throw them up on screen, and we will get them as quick as we can. And when we have also Sean Bartlett says,
"Hey, Sean."
He's thinking of Mike Skinner.
Yeah.
All right. So there's two examples of great comments that And you know what? We're probably going to be doing like a little prize drawing, like a little giveaway. So anybody who puts in a comment and it gets put on screen, you'll get entered into a prize drawing. Holy cow, that's amazing.
What?
We are a high class operation here.
Are we eligible for entrance into the prize drawing, Alan?
If you can think of a way to do a comment that I put on the screen, then sure. Under an alias or something. Oh, Rob just informs me that Sean, who just posted that comment, is in Scotland.
Yes.
Oh, Sean, yeah.
He
That's
hosts
amazing.
he hosts a radio show on Heartland FM in
Super.
Perth, which is in the Highlands
Oh,
of
wow.
Scotland. And I happened upon his show on Radio Garden once, and it's probably the best 2 hours of radio I ever heard, and so I've been listening ever since.
Wow. Well, Sean, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Scotland. That is amazing.
It's 1 a.m. over there, by
Yeah.
the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Crazy. All right. So anything else that we want to say about great vocalists or what makes a great vocalist, or just like random examples
we
before
should
we get
jump
into
in.
some very special picks that we have picked?
I think we should pick our picks.
All right, sure, let's do it. So each one of us has selected 5 vocalists that we want to talk about. And yes, 5. And so we're going to go sort of a round robin deal. Rob is going to lead us off. And we're going to talk about some of these vocalists and why we love them and some examples of what makes them great. So wait, before we do that, though,
Jim Cardillo, my buddy.
Jim Cardillo says, how important is having a distinctive voice that you can recognize immediately factor into it?
That's a
That
good
is a
point.
good
Wow,
question.
he just set the table. He really set the table.
Because
Right.
Jim knows his music.
And
No, he has no idea how he just set the table.
I was
He'll
gonna
know in
say,
mere
I-
seconds.
I've seen what we all have put up as our choices.
Yeah.
Had a little bit of a sneak preview. And I think every single one of them has their own distinctive voice.
Yes.
So I think, Jim, you're going to see for all of us, that's very important.
Yeah, agreed. And, you know, I'm certainly thinking of examples of where even when they're not the featured singer on something and they're doing like background vocals on someone else's record, you can tell
Mhm.
their
Mhm.
voice. And, you know, there's certain people like, and I'm just going to say Miss Patti LaBelle, you cannot hide that voice. I mean, that is a voice that just cuts through anything. So yes, I think distinctive voice is a really important point. All right. So Rob, why don't you kick us off with your first
So
featured singer?
I started with Johnny Cash, mainly because a couple things. First, that bass baritone voice. There's not really another voice that's like it. Now, granted, he doesn't really have a whole lot going on in the charisma category, but the voice and the outlaw image and just the life story pretty much makes up for that. And his songs about tribulation, retribution, sorrow, you know, even his gospel records and his albums where he did an album of patriotic songs, they're all incredible. And he has this almost 5-decade body of work, right? Everything from, you know, Folsom Prison all the way through Hurt, right? There's a great story this week. Someone was talking to Martin Gore of Depeche Mode, and they said, hey, what did you think of Johnny Cash covering Personal Jesus? And he goes, you know, what's funny about that is someone called me and said they heard Johnny Cash's version of Personal Jesus on the radio, and he never called and asked for permission, but he's Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
So they never actually did anything. They never it's Johnny Cash. We're
Right.
like letting it go. Right. But the thing is, right, the life story of, you know, addiction and sorrow and, you know, having these crazy marriages and all of the stuff that he went through is really prolific. Right. And those experiences have influenced his music. Right. You start off with the Sun Record stuff, which is sort of basically really slapdash, quick, great in and out kind of rockabilly country stuff. And then you get this like sophisticated end game with the Rick Rubin catalog where you get like Hurt, right? and you get the cover of Personal Jesus, and you get the cover of I've Been Everywhere, which is on like every commercial everywhere now.
Yeah.
And just a prolific storyteller. Sometimes I wonder whether he sings or whether he's just telling stories, or if he's both. And he sort of set the table, for everyone from Trent Reznor to Metallica, to some of these new country guys that are coming up now. And it's really hard to not look at that catalog and just look at like those records for like 20 or 30 years, and now we're looking at the stuff he did in the 80s, the late 70s and 80s, when he was like really addicted, but kind of not focusing on putting out great records. And even that stuff's been kind of re-examined as like, wow, this is better than we thought. Also, those collaborations that he did outside of Ruben, but he was in a band with Chris Christopherson and Waylon Jennings and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, that whole thing was awesome as well. So yeah, that's mine right there. That's my first one.
Right on.
Yep. Can't argue with that. Mr. Cash. Stephanie.
Okay. Well,
I can't even imagine who your first pick would be.
Well, here's the thing. So it was very hard to pick 5, but what I did was I pictured myself on a desert island, and if I couldn't imagine myself not hearing their voices ever again, they made my top 5. But it's very hard. I mean, it really,
Wow.
it's just.
Oh yeah. Of course.
Okay. So my first pick is Linda Ronstadt. I don't think for me, there's just not really a better voice. She's got such a pure tone. She's so versatile. She can sing anything. Yeah. She really can. She can sing anything, any style. She's perfect. She's perfect. So I don't know. She was my number one choice for that. Things that really hooked me, songs that really got me into her were, and I wasn't, I grew up in the 70s, and, I knew her from radio really. But when I went back and sort of examined her more in the 90s, I would say more around the 90s and then 2000s. And I really got hooked on her interpretation of Desperado, her cover of Rock Me on the Water. By the way, another thing about her, she interprets a song like nobody's business, I think.
Mm-hmm.
She's not, she puts her own spin on every single thing she does. So to me, she's absolute perfection, everything she does. And that is my number one pick.
I will throw in on that. Yes, that she is the kind of person that sings any style of music, like she was born to sing that style of music. But I tend to love her more like rock. And when she was kind of like in the early, like the new wave movement, she kind of got a slight bit punkier and stuff like that.
So like Get Closer or something like that.
Get Closer is fantastic.
It
but
is.
My favorite Ronstadt album is Mad Love.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. I love that so much.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Like she's been through many styles, and every one of them, I think she nails.
Yeah. All right, Anthony, can we please unleash the metal?
Yes, and we are going to bring the dragon with Ronnie James Dio as the first one.
Yeah.
And I picked Ronnie because I think he has one of the most iconic voices in hard rock and heavy metal.
Yeah.
He started out with a band called Elf, but where he really made his name initially was when he joined Ritchie Blackmore in Rainbow. And you listen to those early Rainbow records and you really hear his versatility, whether it's a very kind of soft, smooth voice on something like Catch the Rainbow, or his iconic vocal fry on something like Kill the King. And we talked about charisma earlier, and I always remember a story from the documentary that Alan and I watched together at the end of last year, where shortly after he joined Black Sabbath, he had to deal with a lot of audiences chanting for Ozzy Osbourne. And he would get quite a hostile atmosphere, but by the end of the show, he had that audience eating out of his hand.
Yeah.
He really, to me, had everything: the charisma, the voice, the look. I mean, you just saw him. I mean, come on. And his career in my mind, is second to none. I mean, he was in 3 of the most iconic heavy metal bands of all time: Rainbow, Black Sabbath, and then his eponymous band, Dio. And all 3 of them, to hit gold 3 times, that
Right.
is
Yeah.
unusual.
Right.
You kind of get success with one band, okay, that could be luck. 2 bands, ooh, you join Black Sabbath, come on, you're gonna fail with Black Sabbath. Then you go off and do a solo thing, and that is just as big as everything else, and that says a lot about the quality of his voice, his vocal style, and his onstage charisma. Absolutely iconic. And just to name one song from each band that I think really epitomizes how spectacular his voice is. From Rainbow, I would say go listen to Stargazer.
100%.
From
That
Sabbath,
is the one. Oh, man.
Sabbath, it's Die Young. And from Dio, Straight Through the Heart. I think
Nice.
those 3 really, really give a good account of Ronnie James Dio.
What I think is interesting about Dio is, as someone who's not a big metal guy, I know when I hear him that it's Dio. And I think that is like one of the biggest testaments that you can have, especially in a genre that doesn't necessarily get the widespread proliferation that other genres do. Like the minute you hear a song of his and he's singing, you know who it is. And
I think
that's a huge legacy testament.
Yeah, and that feeds into the question that Jim asked at the beginning: how
Yes.
important is having a distinctive voice? He's one of them.
I 100% agree, but I also think it's his songwriting. I think that he writes songs that don't sound like anybody else. There are certain things in a Ronnie composition, whether it be him working with one of those bands or him in his solo project, that just scream Ronnie James Dio to you. It's more than just the voice. It's the lyrics. It's the imagery. It's everything.
Yeah.
Hi,
Absolutely.
Karen. We're waving to Karen Carlucci, who says hello.
Oh, nice.
Thanks for joining us, Karen.
There she is. Hi,
Hi,
Karen.
Karen.
What a pleasure to have you joining us.
So, Alan, what's your number one?
You know, what's interesting is that when we put together our lists, we cover lots of territory. And so we've had sort of the outlaw country guy. We've had the sort of singer, chanteuse kind of thing. We've had the metal guy. And now it's time for some soul and funk.
Yay.
Because we're going to go to Prince.
Yes.
Okay, so here's the thing. I think that everyone talks about Prince as what a phenomenal musician he was, what a songwriter he was, as a producer, as like a protege. I mean, like a guy who has all these proteges around him, the influence that he's had on rock music. I don't think a lot of people really talk about him as a pure singer.
Mm-hmm.
He has an incredible range. He has an incredible range of styles. He can do anything. And plus, phenomenal guitar player. But more than that, he's a keyboardist. He's a bass player. He's a drummer.
Yeah.
He is a one-man band, and his early albums are exactly that. You know, his first couple of albums are just him in the studio, and everything you hear is him playing it. And man, I think he is one of the most like true consummate musicians. He like exuded music.
Yep.
In every way. And there was a period in the 80s where he had so much material that he was writing, and all of it of such quality that he had to basically farm all that stuff out, because Warner Brothers was like, we are not releasing a new Prince album every month because that is impossible to sell. It's impossible to market. So we can't do it. So he started getting bands like The Time and The Family and all these other bands that was his way to farm out a lot of the material that he was writing. Plus he wrote stuff for the Bangles and, you know, all these other songs that he's putting out. And then other artists are doing covers of his stuff like Cyndi Lauper and Shaka Khan. And the 80s, like even when there's not a Prince record on a chart at any moment, there's probably a Prince song somewhere there from another artist, because he was a constant output of material, and all of it incredible quality.
And his songs made other artists. Like you look at Sinead O'Connor, right?
Yeah.
Sinead O'Connor's nowhere near a commercial name without having a Prince song under her belt.
Yeah. So Prince,
Nice.
my dog.
Nice.
All right,
Rob,
Rob,
who's yours?
who you got next?
So I'm going to go to Manchester, well, Macclesfield to be specific, and talk about Ian Curtis of Joy Division. Now, bear in mind, there's only 2 Joy Division albums. So the body of work is very, very short. But you listen to, things now like Interpol, for example, and you hear Ian Curtis, or you listen to, Idols, right? You hear Ian Curtis. So he's got this like dark baritone voice working for him. He's got this like dancing style that is still just bizarre. So he's got this like charisma and this stage presence and this like thing where you can't stop watching him. Even if you're watching old videos of him, you still can't stop watching him, right? And the lyrics are kind of like very, very in tune with the sort of things around him that are going on, right? With his various illnesses and, growing up in a working class family and, just digesting as much Jim Morrison and Bowie as he can and spitting it out in a different sort of version. But for a guy whose, career ended in 1980, we're still talking about him now. And that voice, there is still not a voice that sounds like it at all, which is really, I think is important as well. So I think when he talks about having a distinctive voice, when Jim talks about that, I think he's right. He's got a voice that is really, timeless in many ways, because you listen to it now and it doesn't sound like this was made in, 79 or 80, right? It sounds like it's still nice. And he's got, I think the thing that he really has outside of the charisma is he has still this sense of mystery that kind of awes people, right? They're like, where are his lyrics coming from? Where is he coming from? What's he going through? He's got this like almost mythos about him that has still carried him through. And those 2 records that he's on, I mean, there's also Still, which is the live record, but those 2 records that he made are fantastic still. And you listen to Closer now, and you listen to like a song like Decades, you can hear that this is a guy in pain, right? Probably not till Kurt Cobain would we hear somebody who's like singing about pain, that's going through pain in this way.
Yeah.
And, it's almost like a manifestation of like Bessie Smith or Billie Holiday and how he's singing about his pain and his agony, but no one knew just how deep it was. And I think that coming out in the lyrics. And then also, you kind of have this weird tongue-in-cheek thing where he's like, so tired of Love Will Keep Us Together by the Captain and Tennille that he makes Love Will Tear Us Apart, right? Which is, kind of fun and weird. So
that's going to go right into my next pick.
That
oh, no, it's
plan.
not Captain and
I was going to
Tennille.
say, no,
that doesn't.
Before we get into Steph's next pick, though, I think Ian Curtis' influence, I mean, you made the point, Rob, it still lasts today. And you listen to an even newer band like White Lies.
Yeah.
And you hear that direct lineage. It's amazing how there are still bands forming over 40 years later. Some of these guys weren't even born when he died, who are still claiming that direct influence.
And when you go to Manchester, it is eerie how much his fingerprints are all over that city still. It's really interesting in terms of being like a cultural icon. It's fascinating.
Okay, so I was thinking Captain. That's all I heard was Captain, and that brings me to Elton John, and because I was really thinking Captain Fantastic, and that's my number 2 pick. So this goes to Jim Cardillo's point again, distinctive voice. I would say I'm not really maybe talking about his later albums. I think his voice did have a bit of it changed obviously, but his early to mid years, I just don't think there was a better, well, I mean, there were maybe equal. There weren't better rock singers though. And charisma out the wazoo. Obviously, look at him. And I do look to Captain Fantastic as being a really, I mean, it's my favorite album of his. I don't think there's a bad song on it. I don't think there's a mediocre song on it. It's genius. But you listen to songs on there like "We All Fall in Love Sometimes," Captain Fantastic, obviously Captain Fantastic and the Brown Cowboy, the first song. It's a concept album. It's about Bernie and Elton's journey from nothing to making it big time. It's a real story. And I also love, I have to say, many years later, they did a follow-up to that album called Captain and the Kid. And it's not great. It's not perfect or anything, but it's really interesting. And there's some excellent songs on that album too. But I just don't think I could ever live without not hearing his voice again. He's also, you can go back and watch performances that he's done. I'm talking about just when he did stuff as a trio with like him and Nigel and Dave. Was it Davey or D? Must have been D. And the sound that they produced and the harmonies too are they're unmistakable. They're unmistakable and they're just incredible. So to me, that was also the first album I ever bought was Greatest Hits, Elton John's Greatest Hits in 1974 came out, I think. So
That's a good one.
That's my guy.
Before we move on, Sean Bartlett says about iconic singers, a lot of it depends for me on where I'm at any specific time. For example, Iggy Pop can't sing for Toffee, but you cannot ignore him. And his songs made the film Trainspotting.
It's true.
Yes.
But sometimes his unique voice, and I don't mean to dwell on Iggy for too long because I know we have other singers we all want to mention, but sometimes it really works in a song. I can't imagine Gimme Danger being sung by anyone else, and I have heard it sung by Ewan McGregor.
Right, exactly.
So, sometimes, even though, as Sean suggests, he can't sing, that in itself fits a certain style.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
And it's like you were saying earlier, Anthony, about when somebody knows how to use what it is they have. And when like a song is written well for that kind of voice, then it totally works. Like in the hair metal scene, I don't really consider Tom Kiefer to be one of the greatest singers, but when Cinderella does a song that's written well for Tom's voice, man, he just kills it. So, right,
Anthony.
Well, I think I'm going to stay true to type and take us to some more metal. And anyone who is watching the video feed as opposed to listening to this will see I'm wearing an Iron Maiden t-shirt. And that was deliberate for this.
Yes.
Because my next choice is the one and only Bruce Dickinson, the air raid siren himself. And to me, there's a similarity here with Dio in the power of the voice. I mean, you listen to Iron Maiden's first two records, which were without him, and then you listen to The Number of the Beast, which was their first album with him, and you see what he adds to that band. And his voice has a vibrato and a sustain to it that has just been... I guess singers have been trying to mimic that ever since, and there's only one Bruce Dickinson. You can try all you want, but there's only one Bruce. And I think that really shows. Bruce is someone who needs to stay interested in his projects, and you could tell towards the end of his first stint with Iron Maiden, he was getting bored. The quality drops off. But then he went and had an amazing solo career where he made two of the best metal albums of all time with Accident of Birth and The Chemical Wedding. And then he goes back to Iron Maiden, and that band, which had flagged in the 90s, is revitalized by Bruce coming back. And they come out with Brave New World, and that voice, and I don't mean any disrespect to Blaze Bayley, who replaced him in Iron Maiden, because I love Blaze's work. I even worked for Blaze for a couple of years. But Bruce reinvigorated that band. And ever since they've been on an upward trajectory, ever since he came back. And again, there's a reason he's one of the most iconic singers in metal. And even now, he's in his 60s and he's still running around the stage like a madman. I mean, he is one of the most energetic frontmen you will ever see. He's just incredible.
Yes.
So that's why Bruce is my second choice.
Yeah, I agree. There is definitely, I don't know that either of them are classically trained, but there's definitely an operatic style to both him and Ronnie
Mhm.
that I think takes that metal scene to a higher level. And I think that there is not only their vocals, but there is an intelligence in their lyrics. And especially Bruce, I think, is so incredibly literate that I counted, I think, 27 different Iron Maiden songs which are inspired by literature. He is an incredibly smart, well-read gentleman who can write a song.
Yeah, and always has been. I mean, you look back on that throughout his entire career, and he's always gone back to literature for inspiration, some of
Yes.
which has been pretty obscure stuff. I mean, the Chemical Wedding in itself was effectively a concept album around the works of William Blake, which is amazing and so incredibly esoteric. I mean, to me, he's just a genius.
Sean pitches in on Stephanie's selection of Elton John that he recently saw Elton lose his voice in Auckland, and his tears brought on Sean's tears. I guess that's what he's saying.
Oh,
As he changed his set with, for example, Song for Guy played
wow.
spontaneously. That's
Oh my
really cool.
gosh. And which is a great song. Yeah. Oh,
Mm.
that's pretty intense.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's fantastic. Okay. I guess
Alan.
that's me next, right? All right, so we're going to go back to the 60s, to the hazy days of drugs and alcohol. And
Wait, we're
we're
not
going to
there
go,
still? What?
and we are going to go with the iconic voice of Miss Grace Slick,
Yeah.
who, I love that whole 60s scene, and particularly Jefferson Airplane. I think is just one of the greatest American bands ever. I think that Grace doesn't get her due. I think she gets her due as a vocalist, but I don't think people think of her in terms of being a songwriter and a pianist, and she excels at both of those things. And as a vocalist, I think that she has this dynamic quality and a real like drama about her voice that really sells any song that she's singing. And some of the examples that she's another one that pulls from literature a good bit. And an example that I'm thinking of is a song called Rejoice, which was sort of inspired by James Joyce and various novels. And the lyrics are just so cutting and so like insightful. And the vocal is really rich and gorgeous. And there's a number of songs that I can think of from her. Lawman is one from one of the last Jefferson Airplane albums called Bark, where it's basically sort of it's not even about, because I think the actual incident happened after the fact, but it's about a lawman coming to her door with a shotgun, and she's like, look, man, this ain't gonna happen. Eskimo Blue Day is a song from Volunteers, and man, it's just an amazing song. And there's just all kinds of things. One of my favorite songs of hers, though, is a Jefferson Starship song. It's from one of the early Jefferson Starship. So she was in Airplane. She went through the entire history of like both versions of Jefferson Starship, and then Airplane reformed. And she's just done so much stuff. But there's a song on the Dragonfly album called Hyperdrive, and it's just one of the coolest lyrics I've ever heard. It's this 7-minute song almost 8 minutes actually, that's really kind of like slow and drawn out with all this amazing imagery, this like really trippy stuff about there being corners in time and all this kind of stuff. And her piano playing on it and her voice on it is just stunning. So Grace Slick, man, she defined that whole generation as far as I'm concerned. Like there's, it's hard not to talk about Janis Joplin, but there's just nobody that tops Grace Slick for me. She is the 60s for me.
And to give a shout out to another literary influence from her, Alan, White Rabbit, that is based around Alice Through the Looking Glass, and easily an iconic song featuring her voice so heavily. Amazing.
Right on. All right. So at this point, I think we will, for those listening to the podcast tomorrow, we're going to take a little quick break and we'll be back in 30 seconds to finish our discussion. For those of you watching live, though, we're not stopping. We're going right into our next set of picks with Rob. Rob, who you got on this one?
With the 5th pick in the NFL draft. No.
Right.
So I'm going to go to the mean streets of Southport, England, which are not mean or they barely streets. But I'm going to pick Mark Almond from Soft Cell. A couple reasons here. One is his ability to sort of sing across eras, right? He takes his passion for Northern soul and brings it to something like Tainted Love. He is a fan of that like cultural phenomenon in England called the kitchen sink drama, right? And brings those to records like Say Hello, Wave Goodbye or Torch, right? Then he's got the stuff he did where he's doing covers of Jacques Brel, right? Then he's making a record, I think it was the only number one he had as a soloist, but he made a record with Gene Pitney, a cover of Something's Got a Hold of My Heart. And then in 1987, he made an EP called under the name of Flesh Volcano with J.G. Thirlwell of Scraping Fetus. So he's done collaborations. He's worked across genres. He's got this like way of merging soul and synth pop that I don't think a lot of singers have. It's a very distinctive voice. It's very sort of, at times it's very elegant, but at times it's very sleazy, which is interesting. His narrative story writing, like, I know I talked about Say Hello, Wave Goodbye, but something like that, or even, The Art of Falling Apart or Down in the Subway. Not Down in the Subway. But The Art of Falling Apart, for example, you listen to they're great stories. And that's really interesting. And then the other thing that's kind of fascinating about him is he had a horrific motorcycle accident. And most of his face had to be reconstructed, right? And he had to learn how to sing again completely from scratch. So his voice, when you listen to him now, because they put out a record last year, it is a little different. But he basically has learned to sing again in a way that sounds similar to his old voice, but the pitch is a little different, the inflection's a little different, but it's all still there.
Wow.
So I think that's really kind of interesting too. But like the stuff where he covers songs by Jacques Brel is really fantastic. And I think that his sense for like what works as pop works really well. And then you take something like Tainted Love, which, comes from a Northern soul record, and it kind of makes it their signature, really. And then he nicks the Supremes with Where Did Our Love Go, right? But then you get stuff like Memorabilia, which is just very much of the 80s and very frantic and frenetic, right? And then he put out a record last year called Heart Like Chernobyl that's very catty and kind of dark. So he too has that like dark mysticism thing going on. You're just not really sure where he's coming from, but he's also got this sort of he's got a swagger and he's got a style, and he is not afraid to do what he wants. Anybody who makes a song called I'm Sick of You Tasting Like Somebody Else, pretty clearly knows what they're singing about, right? So yeah, that's my new one.
I'd also like to give him a shout out for making possibly the sleaziest record ever with Sex Dwarf, which I'm on record as saying his voice sounds viciously gay.
Yes.
Yes, but
I had not heard that before. Anthony sent it to me
it's
last
so great.
week, and I was like, dude, that is
The
something.
The video is
Yeah,
never
and
aired.
you watch the live version from the old Grey Whistle test, and just his body language in that. It's vicious is the only word I could come up with to describe it. There is a real nastiness to the sleaze on that record that I just really love.
He loved Mark Bolan so much he borrowed his C for the Mark, right? And he takes the sleaziness of Bolan and like just turns it to 11. It's really interesting.
Nice.
All right. So I will say that Alan and I were going to duke it out for this pick of mine, but Alan graciously let me talk about Ann Wilson,
the Queen.
The Queen. I mean, look, Alan even plays Ann Wilson like heart songs, right?
In a heart tribute band.
Heart tribute band,
correct.
and still he lets me talk about Ann. So we'll have to jointly talk about her.
Yeah,
I feel like she can go from like 0 to 100 in a second. You know, there's like, for example, on Lighter Touch, where she's just, the intro is so quiet, so beautiful, so like just back of her throat kind of singing, like, you know, mellow, and then she just ramps it right up to that huge, you know, crescendo in the beginning of that song. So I feel like she's another one that can do no wrong. She also has she's got an edge to her voice, but she can also sing very purely. She's very versatile too in her style. Of course, you know, look, she can sound just like Robert Plant when she wants to, and she can be rocking as hell. But then she, you know, goes to something like Dog and Butterfly, where it's a gentle, beautiful, mellow song, or Dreamboat Annie. You know, there's several versions of that, but the acoustic kind of mellow version is just, you know, a soft, beautiful song. She has amazing control over her voice, and she still does. We've seen her recently live, Bob and I, and she's just as rocking as ever. I mean, it's almost like time hasn't touched her in terms of her voice. I mean, a little bit, obviously, but she can still pretty much do it. So she's my third pick.
I remember, and this goes back a few years, and I don't remember the people involved, but I remember a producer who was talking about being in the studio with some singer, and the producer was saying, okay, so I think what you should do is, like, on the first part of the song, you know, deliver it like you're doing, and then we'll do like at the climax of it, I want you to like go up an octave and really like wail it, really like push it through. And the singer said, "Who do you think I am, Ann Wilson?"
Yeah, sorry, not everybody can do that.
Right, exactly.
That is not something everyone can do. Yeah, she's just she's a rare talent. She really is. And you know, another cool thing about being that the band Heart is just that Nancy has an amazing voice too, and they blend so well.
Yes. I mean, you could almost, because Ann, as far as like modern rock goes, is so iconic. You know, you could easily do this list with Nancy instead, because Nancy is quite a talent.
She really is.
And equally, not quite equally, because there's nothing like Ann Wilson, especially in her prime, like around the early 80s to like 87, 89 up into the 90s. There was nobody that could touch her live.
Yeah.
Nobody.
Yep.
So yeah, man. But Nancy's no schlub either, man.
Nope.
She has got the pipes, and they are both amazing songwriters, and their harmonies are perfect.
Sister singing, you know.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's mine. Anthony.
Sweet.
Well, I'm going to take us back in a hard rock, but not a metal direction.
Okay.
Nuances here, guys, with the one and only Glenn Hughes, who, for those who don't know Glenn Hughes, he started his career in a band called Trapeze. Then he was in Deep Purple for 3 albums, for Stormbringer, Burn, and Come Taste the Band. Then he went off and did a solo thing for a while. He was in Black Sabbath, one album that everyone, including he, would rather forget. before eventually coming back round, relaunching his solo career, forming Black Country Communion, and most recently doing a stint in the Dead Daisies. And what I find so interesting about Glenn is he's predominantly played in hard rock bands, but he considers himself to be a soul singer. And he's got a real kind of smooth, croony voice that some have compared to Stevie Wonder, and he's been kind of described as having a white man Stevie Wonder voice, to the point where he played Come Taste the Band to Stevie Wonder when they recorded it. And apparently, upon hearing Getting Tighter, Stevie broke up into a big smile and said, "Oh, you listen to my music." So that kind of adds a very unique spin to his records, having that soul and funk influence that Alan previously talked about with Prince, but bringing that slightly heavier edge to it. And wow, what a great set of pipes he has. I had the privilege of seeing him on a solo tour, I think it was in 2019, when he was playing Deep Purple. Specifically, he was celebrating, I think it was Burn. And he can still hit every single one of those notes that he was hitting in the 70s. He is phenomenal.
Wow.
And given all of the drug problems he had, I'm amazed he can still hit those notes. And yet he can. He is one lucky bastard.
Right. Oh, man. Okay, so my next one, there was so many that I would have put on my list. I would have had Dio. I would have had Bruce Dickinson. I certainly would have had Ann Wilson. All of those people could go on my list. I could have gone for Bowie, who would be like the most obvious pick for me. But I really wanted to take an opportunity to kind of like talk about a couple of people that I don't really talk about much or at all on our show. And this next one, I don't think I've ever even mentioned before. But particularly throughout the 80s, this was introduced to me by a best friend at the time, Carrie Christopher. Hi, Carrie. I doubt you're watching. I haven't heard from you in decades, but you never know. And that is In Excess with their amazing lead singer, Michael Hutchence.
Oh, good pick.
And this is one of those examples of charisma. Like, I think he's got a great singing voice, and I think he was a really good front man. I don't think he's not an Ann Wilson. He is not a Ronnie James Dio, but his charisma, he just had this magnetism about him that just, look at this picture with all this huge audience that just draws that number of people in. And I think that he was just an incredible performer.
He was. I saw them a few times. He was amazing.
I did too.
Yeah,
I did too. I saw them on, I don't remember which tour it was now. But anyway, so but I saw him and it was just an amazing show.
yeah.
And so a couple of things that I want to point out, and that is a lot of the hits I think are great. New Sensation and Mystify and that kind of stuff. Shining Star. I love Shining Star. That is probably my favorite In Excess song. And that was like a bonus studio track on their live album, Live Baby Live. But it's just so good. And Burn For You this time. I love their earlier stuff a lot, but from that big album, the one that had Never Tear Us Apart and all those things, the opening track, Guns in the Sky. Holy shit, I love that song. So yeah, Michael Hutchence, man.
Yeah.
What a sad, tragic ending to what I think is an incredible career. And In Excess tried to replace him. They even did that reality show where they auditioned singers live on television.
Oh my God, I forgot about that.
Yeah, to carry on their career. And you cannot replace this guy. There's nothing that really works in the chemistry of that band if it's not Michael Hutchence. And it's just, man, it's so sad, so tragic.
Yeah, and you get the swing, and then you get Listen Like Thieves, where after the first couple records is a completely different way of singing almost, right?
Yeah.
Because when you listen to like Original Sin, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the songs on that album, it's almost like the cadence and the the style in which he's doing his deliveries of his songs is a little, you can tell he's getting there, that like he's transitioning from being like a singer who's like an indie singer into a pop singer. And then you get to Listen Like Thieves and you're like, this guy's an arena singer, right?
Yeah.
You can hear it, right? By the time you get done with Listen Like Thieves, you're like, I don't know where this band is going, but I know that he's carrying them on their back.
Oh yeah.
And that's I think one of the big things about him is that he just sort of just made that whole band.
And he was, of course, so charismatic that he stole Paula Yates away from Bob Geldof, which, you know.
That's a good point. Sean Bartlett chimes in again, and he puts his top 5 out. So
Sylvian.
his number 5 is Bjork, which I know Rob appreciates. Number 4 is David Sylvian and Andy Partridge, a tie there.
Yes.
3 is Tom York, which is an interesting pick. Number 2 is Bowie, and number 1, Billy McKenzie. And he says, sorry, I cheated a bit, but I'm loving this podcast. Thank you so much. We super appreciate that.
I think Tom York, I just want to very quickly comment on him because I don't think any of us called him out, but his voice can be hauntingly beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have thought to put him on this, but wow, the remake of Suspiria, the movie, his voice on the soundtrack for that makes elements of that movie so much more haunting. He's really got a pretty unique voice.
And you listen to like some of the stuff on the bends, like High and Dry. It's like his voice is pretty much carrying that. You listen to You on Pablo Honey, or you listen to
Street Spirit.
Or even Karma Police on OK Computer, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is very much a vocalist who's got a style and a range that's different and unique and completely set apart from other people.
Yeah, when I was putting my list together, I looked through like every album that I own, and I own a lot. And I considered everybody. And I flipped past my Radiohead CDs, and I don't think it even occurred to me to put Tom York on this list, but I find it fascinating that he is in someone's top 5. And I love the fact that many different kinds of singers can mean that much to different people. Okay, so we got 2 more each to go. So let's pick up the pace a little bit. We can go a little long if we need to, but Rob, hit us with your number 4.
So outside of Johnny Cash, he's probably the best concert I've ever seen. Johnny Cash and the Pogues are probably in the top 5. After 9/11, when everybody started coming back, they had a birthday party in St. Louis for Chuck Berry, and Chuck Berry played, and the support act was Little Richard. And I went, and my God, that is the best hour and 20 minutes of a man just screaming and singing and having fun. It was I don't know how to explain it other than it was otherworldly, right? Like when he did Lucille, like he could barely walk because the hips were gone, right? But like when he did Lucille, he did cover Lucille, he did, a couple other songs. It's just like, it's one of those times where you're like, hair on the back of your neck goes up, right? So 1, he's got the voice, right? 2, I think you could make an argument that Little Richard invented the idea of charisma in rock and roll. Also, he did this really interesting thing where he quit doing rock and roll at the height of his career and just decided to make gospel records.
Yeah.
And even those gospel records are amazing. I've gone back and listened to them because I'm not a gospel music guy, but they're amazing, right? So he clearly can sing, right? But he's got these records that are like blatantly raunchy, right? But they're also incredibly catchy as pop songs. And he's got this like in the 1950s, this I don't care what you think of me. I'm a defiant black man who is what I am, that is making like tons of statements and scaring the hell out of parents, right? In ways that just does not happen. And everyone from Prince to Janelle Monáe owes a debt to Little Richard. And just the singing style that is both soulful and screaming, both reverent and irreverent at the same time, is incredible. And his string of pop records that he put out in the early 60s before he switched over to gospel, man, they're phenomenal. Like Tutti Frutti, you know, we all think they're novelty records now, but like Tutti Frutti is like 2.5 minutes of just balls to the wall, kick you in the face pop music, right? And so, yeah, it's Little Richard.
All right. A person that at least 3 of us know, Daniel Pierce, says, talk about Celine. That's your job, man. You tell us what we should be saying about Celine, and we'll put it in the show. You can't argue with the pipes on Celine Dion.
No way.
I may not be a fan of the songs, the music, the delivery, but my God, what a voice that woman has.
That she's under one of the, you know, you had asked before, is a good voice alone enough or whatever?
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes it is. Like, I'm not a great fan of her either, but if I hear her singing live or something, there's just no way I can look away. She's like unbelievable. The voice.
I will never forgive her
Uh-oh.
for the constant video playing on MTV in, I don't know what it was, 97, 98 of My Heart Will Go On.
Not her fault. Not her
That's
fault.
not her fault.
Not
That's
her
MTV's
fault.
fault.
I hope you're happy because it's in the top 20 again.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah, no.
Oh. Well, I'm going to do
man.
like a 180 from Celine. Sorry, Daniel, we're going to pivot. We're going to pivot. And I'm going to go with Brian Wilson, who's one of my idols. I don't really, you know, what can you say about this guy? Look, he's got the most complicated story of almost anyone in rock and roll. And he's still here, making, you know, he's out there doing it still. There's one of my favorite albums is Pet Sounds. And I know it's kind of cliched, but it's for a reason, because every single song on that album is genius. When I listen to I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, almost every time I want to cry, because you can feel the pain coming through, and it's almost like childlike innocence and pain, and, you know, a life trauma, and he conveys so much with his beautiful soaring voice. The fact that he composed, you know, everything, you know, almost all of this by himself, really, is incredible. And that the voice on this guy is just unbeatable. And it wasn't just with more advanced albums, I don't think. I feel like, you know, Help Me Rhonda, All Summer Long, these kind of, you know, classic songs, I Get Around, you know, you hear that voice, and that's another case of what a unique voice. I don't know anyone that can sound like that.
Yeah. I mean, when I saw him on that Pet Sounds tour and he did God Only Knows, I think I cried.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
It's hard not to.
He's one of those people that you just have to see.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to drop everything and go see.
Yeah.
And this is really funny because this is the third time that Help Me Rhonda has come up this week, right? And people forget because he's got this legendary status. And we've done a couple older podcasts where we talk about Brian Wilson. You can go back and listen to those. But people often forget those really outstanding Beach Boy records.
Yeah.
And
just think about a song like Caroline No. It's like, every single thing. When I think about him, it's just like some emotional, you know, it's just so emotional. I think he brings out so much emotion, and he gives so much emotion. So anyway,
Rob mentioned God Only Knows. I think that is one of the greatest pop songs ever written.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, Anthony, let's do it.
Steph just talked about taking a 180, and I'm going to take us on another 180. In fact, this might even be a 720. I don't know. This is really far.
Our heads are flying
away
off
from Brian Wilson. So I'm going with Alyssa White Gluz. For a long time, I thought it was pronounced Gluz. It's apparently Gluz, and she is the current singer for Arch Enemy. For those who don't know of Arch Enemy, they are a melodic death metal band. probably wondering, what the fuck is melodic death metal? Well, that means that the music itself tends to be fairly melodic, as you would see in traditional heavy metal, like Iron Maiden, where the singing tends to be heavily growled. And this lady is one of the best metal growlers I have ever heard. She has a really impressive she has this very impressive set of vocal cords. I was trying to figure out how to say that without saying she has an impressive throat, which sounds very odd in me. What I find so impressive about her, and she's only just started doing it with Arch Enemy, but she did it more with her former band, The Agonist, is how she can transition from those harsh, growled vocals to the cleans. And I've seen footage of her doing it live where she'll be full on like, blah, 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 and then just go into this amazing, beautiful melodic voice. It is so impressive. And
you turned us on to her. I love her. I think she's amazing.
Yeah. She's Canadian, so don't hold that against her. But beyond
Blame
that,
Canada.
But beyond that, she's fantastic, and I'm very happy that Arch Enemy picked her up when they did as the replacement for their previous singer, who was also a lady who had a very impressive growling voice, but she's not who I want to talk about today. So yes, Alyssa White-Gluz, absolutely love her.
Good pick.
Okay, so another one that I don't think I've ever really talked much about on our show, and that is Crowded House. And
Yes.
Neil Finn, who, kind of like Michael Hutchence, isn't like a spectacular singer. I think that his strength is as a songwriter. And I think that he is one of the greatest like song crafters. He is an impressive lyricist. And I think that he writes well for his voice. And not to say that he's not a good singer, because I think he is. I think he has a really great voice. But I just absolutely love Crowded House. I think as modern pop crooners almost, and that's not a really good way to put it. I just think that there's nobody that can really touch Neil Finn. I just think he is an amazing writer and singer. And let me get one comment.
I'm so glad
again.
you picked him because he was on my runner-up list, and he's amazing.
Yeah. Sean Bartlett says, if you're going to mention Celine, how about Fred Durst, Chad Kroeger, or Yoko Ono? Only joking. Better say Ian Dury.
I don't have Ian Dury on my list, but okay. Fred Durst.
Yeah.
I think Sean might be trolling a little. I don't know why.
I love it. I love it.
Maybe. All right. So we're at the lightning round. Right?
Oh, Rob.
So Rob, hit us with your last one and let's be quick.
The last one was the hardest one. So I went with Alex Turner of the Arctic Monkeys. I just said to myself, what's the one voice that I can think of off the top of my head that sounds like no other voice? And that's what I came up with. This like combination of like surrealism and kitchen sink realism in his vocals and in his songs is pretty incredible. He's done desert rock, he's done soul, he's done sort of like this lounge kind of stuff. He's done rock and indie. He's kind of all over the place with what he sings. His voice is very distinctive, whether it's, crying, don't you look good on the dance floor, Crying Lightning, and then, the AM songs. They're all different styles of music sung by the same guy. It's almost like more than one different band. So, that's my last one.
All right.
The fifth one was hardest for me too, because it's like there's so many runners up. Like, I mean, how do I not have Karen Carpenter on here, or Pat Benatar, or Paul McCartney, or Jennifer Hudson, or whatever? But I went with someone who I absolutely love, and I don't think I could not hear another one of his songs, Daryl Hall. I feel like just the classic blue-eyed soul kind of, Philly sound that, I mean, he's very open about his influences. But he does it well. And he's, they've gone from the 70s to the 80s. I mean, they were massive in the 80s and the 90s up until now, and still doing it. so hit after hit after hit. I mean, especially in the 70s and 80s, with Sarah Smile, She's Gone, Kiss on My List, and they're, like 80s phase, Private Eyes and all, and
Man Eater.
right. And into Big Bam Boom and H2O. I mean, there's just, I love the smoothness of his voice. I love, again, that he can also do a very nice kind of calm, mellow thing and then really ramp it up. And he's got a great range. He's got a great vocal range. So he's my 5th pick.
All right. Anthony.
Well, I'm going with something completely different from every other singer I've gone for. So up until now, I've gone for hard rock and heavy metal singers. My last and final choice is an out-and-out pop singer, and that is Marina Diamandis, also known as Marina and the Diamonds, also known simply as Marina. And she has such a unique voice. The way she pronounces her words, she's just a really interesting singer to me. And I find her incredibly entrancing. She's not necessarily what I would normally listen to. Her music I would best describe as kind of very quirky pop music. There are some albums she's done I love better than others, particularly love Fruit. That came out at a very difficult time of my life and gave me some real strength that things would get better and that, breakups were not as bad as they may seem at the time. I think she's just a fascinating artist. She writes all of her own music, occasionally bringing in collaborators, but you can always tell when there were collaborators because they're the albums that sound less like her own style. I've had the privilege of seeing her live on 3 occasions, and she is every bit as brilliant live as she is in the studio. So absolutely adore her. Go check her out if you want to listen to any of her albums. I highly recommend both Fruit and her most recent one, which the name escapes me right now, but I'll remember it and mention it before we wrap up, since we're on a speed round.
All right, and to close us out, somebody that I have mentioned a few times, not a whole lot, not certainly as much as I've mentioned Bowie, which I've run into the ground, I'm pretty sure, but one of my favorite bands, October Project, and their lead singer, Mary Fall, who is just incredible. She has this lush, sort of really throaty alto voice that's just incredible. And she has a really strong range. And she was the lead singer for October Project for their first 2 albums. They reformed later on in different guises, and it was never the same. And then she went on to a solo career where just some of her stuff is unbelievable. I would highly recommend the first October Project album. Is unique and just lush and gorgeous, and I can't say enough about her. She's amazing. One final comment from Sean Bartlett. He says, "Cheers, guys. Enjoyed that. I felt like the 5th member of the Beatles tonight."
You were.
That's so awesome. Thank you. All right. So that's it.
Very
quickly,
quickly, I remembered it. It's Ancient Dreams in a Modern Land. That was her most recent.
Good job.
Go check that out.
Very good.
Excellent. All right, gang, that was it for our first live show. Thank you so much for the folks who have watched along, and thanks for the people who commented. We are going to be back next Monday. So this show will go out tomorrow as our podcast, and then next week we'll be doing another thing, possibly on metal. We'll see.
Well, Tommy Stinson is coming up the week after, though.
Right. Oh, that's right. Oh, right. So next Monday, our interview with Tommy Stinson. A great interview, man. We really enjoyed having him on. That'll come out next week. We'll be recording most likely a metal show with a couple of guests, and that'll go out the following Monday. Thank you for keeping me on schedule, Stephanie. I appreciate it. All right. So, gang, even though we've got our credits on screen, why don't we tell people for the podcast tomorrow where they can find more about us if they were listening, if they're wanting to find us? Stephanie, how about you?
Okay. You can find me right here at my website, therearebirds.com. You can find me on Bandcamp under my name, Stephanie Seymour. You can find me on Facebook at Stephanie Seymour Music and on Instagram at _r_birds and on all the streaming platforms all over the place, Spotify and all that.
Nice. All right, Rob.
So you can find me on Twitter, Post, and the Facebook. Also on Weekend Justice from needcoffee.com. Their train wreck podcast we do once a month. Also every week on Mondays, I do a show on Louder Than War Radio called Antics. It's 6 to 8 Greenwich time, 1 to 3 Eastern, 12 to 2 Central, and all kinds of sounds in no particular order. You can just listen to it. If you are missing it, you can go to the Mixcloud page and listen to that show or all the other shows on the network as well. And then Wednesdays, I do a show called Juxtaposition on KDHX, and it's 7 to 9 p.m. Central. If you're busy, you might be out and about, you might be getting drinks, you might be working or whatever. Maybe you're brushing your teeth with Crest or whatever. Or maybe you're trying to go to the store and find some AIM. It's okay. You can just listen to it later on our archive stream at kdhx.org. Please listen because I'm very sad.
And you got an email, I guess it was, from a listener who gave you a very special list. You know what I'm talking about?
I've had a couple people email me in the last couple of weeks that are interesting.
The one you said a listener emailed you and gave you an entire list of animals that you can use.
Oh yeah, we mentioned that on last week's show. I mentioned the one of them, but yeah, I had a listener that sent a whole list of. Normally when we do this, I'll come up with an animal saying like, oh, if you're watering your hedgehog or something, right? And someone came up with like a list of animals, and they're very specific, like African pit viper, Madagascar fruit bat. They are very specific. So you'll be hearing more of those in the coming weeks.
All right, Anthony, where can people locate you and your sultry voice?
You can also hear me on Watchers in the Fourth Dimension, a podcast where myself and 2 friends, now used to be 3 friends, are watching our way through all of Doctor Who from 1963 until now. We have been on hiatus since January, but we are working on new material now.
Yay!
So we're coming back.
Good.
But beyond that, there and here. Those are the 2 places you can hear me.
Nice. And I have written a few books and have a few new ones in the works that are coming out pretty soon. And I've got a few other podcasts, and you can find all of those great things on cosmiccreative.com. And I guess for the people listening after tonight, I should say that it is spelled KOZMIC creative.com. Fortunately for the people watching, they can just see it on screen and they don't have to be told how it's spelled. All right. So that's it for us this week. We will be back next week. Hope you'll be listening then. Thank you all so much for joining in, and we will see you soon. Keep rocking on.
Rock on.